rules change, and her expectations, I expected to get this position. I expected that my performance at this level would result in me getting this because I fit the criteria. And the criteria changes in the middle of the game. Now I've been excluded, and there's a sense in which that's unjustified, right? The rules and the knowledge can't be transformed, right? Law, the codification of law is precisely that. It's been codified. It's been solidified. It's been, right? The codification of law sends the signal to the population that here are the expectations. While we recognize that punishment is justified insofar as you have knowledge, ignorance also isn't an excuse. But what's certainly unacceptable, what's undeniably unacceptable, is for the rules to change in the middle of the game. You can't do that, right? So it becomes unjustified. There's many, many different aspects to this, but I didn't want to, because this is tangential a bit, I didn't want to go into too much detail other than to say that in terms of Al-Farabi's account, right, of the implementation of physical force, obviously force and punishment is going to be justified, undeniably, where members of the population had a pre-existing understanding, had a recognized understanding, had an acknowledged understanding of what expectations were, and the failure to facilitate those expectations will result in punishment. Martin Luther King, perfect example, knew this. The civil rights movement leaders knew this. We know we're breaking the law. We know that our actions are in defiance of the law. They knew the law back and forth. However, we're still going to stand our ground, and we're willingly going to break the law because, as I said earlier, it's not about law, it's about morality and ethic, right? So that there was a very rational, and that's why the civil rights movement worked. That's why they succeeded, because they didn't oppose the abuses in political authority, which undeniably that was prior to the civil rights movement. The abuses of political authority, they didn't fight it with force. There was a sense in which the regime recognized that internally we'll destabilize ourselves because we won't have any logic. They're making an appeal to the defiance of law via morality and ethic, and we are an institution that supports morality and ethic. Wow, you beat us at our game. So begrudgingly, maybe at first, we're going to yield, we, the state, are going to yield to the civil rights movement because you, in a sense, are making a rational appeal, right? MLK was a type 1 educator, right? He was that type of he was the type of educator that made rational appeals to the state and got the state to conform. I mean, you can't. Right? That's why we celebrate holidays. I mean, it's pretty profound what he was able to do. Okay, so next part. So on tyranny and the non-virtuous regimes, right? The non-virtuous. Okay. All right. So the idea of a non-virtuous regime, again, it is a recognition that for Al-Farabi, the discourse is situated in terms of sovereignty, if you will, i.e. regimes, in a virtuous ethic moral discourse. Right? This has changed substantially from antiquity, but the conception is the same. I think what's absolutely profoundly applicable, aside from all the applications that I've already said up until this point for almost an hour now, is this following quote. So listen, I'm going to read this quote through its entirety, and then I'll go back and strategically analyze the quote. So this is a critical point. So this is key. We're talking about the totalitarian, the tyrannical regime. War, conquest, the overpowering and enslavement of others, the tyranny over them, is one of the supreme ends pursued by men. It gives to the tyrannical regime in which men order their regimes with the main purpose of enslaving each other or other regimes, with the main purpose. They do not enslave and kill to attain other ends, but to satisfy a supreme end common to all of them, the love of tyranny. Indeed, the bad regime, pursuing other ends such as wealth, honor, and pleasure, are in many cases transformed into tyrannies when these other ends are attained. The satisfaction of these desires seems to free the citizens of bad regimes to pursue the highest evil of ignorant and erring regimes. That is, the view that tyranny is the good. War, as an end in itself, is for Al-Farabi the supreme vice that can have no place in the regime whose end is the supreme virtue. Insanity. Insanity. Profoundly, profoundly deep, well-written paragraph, right? So the idea is this. We are talking about values. And the question is, what does your now sovereignty, what does the regime value, right? So the question is, what is political value? That's how I would sort of augment this for a contemporary 21st century analysis. And the question is, what is political? This seems like a sort of a rather trite question. What's political value? I don't know. Blah 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 blah. It doesn't seem like it's a very profound question, but it's a profound question, right? It's a very difficult question to answer, right? What does it mean to say? And this is obviously context specific, right? Regime, sovereign specific. So I'm going to sort of situate this discourse in terms of the U.S. So, what is political value? A huge problem that the United States is facing politically, diplomatically, is the attempt to redefine the United States value, right? The United States value post 9/11. Obviously, for many, many reasons. Obviously, we know why, right? Economic collapse, right? Unfortunately, what happened in Abu Ghraib, and on and on and on and on, right? What is it that the United States political superstructure values? The idea is, the argument is, from Al-Farabi, what he says is that we have to look at the distinction between means and ends. There is a sense in which, right, there is a sense in which if, we're going to talk about two conditions, right, first condition and second condition, right, same thing, and I'm going to have to erase this, right. There is a sense in which we have, there is a sense in which Al-Farabi, what I just read, is conceptually represented, is sort of graphically represented in this way. We have war as a means in the second example, and we have war as an end in the first example. And you would think that this minor change isn't that substantial, but it profoundly transforms the political architecture of the regime if we identify war as a means versus war as an end. I think what's absolutely important here in terms of Al-Farabi is to recognize that we aren't talking at any point about pacifism. Al-Farabi in no sense, and I've read him the primary text, the translation of the primary texts myself, so I know this for a fact, right? Al-Farabi would not entertain a political structure, a political architecture which didn't incorporate war in some aspect, right? He's not going to give credit to sort of the egalitarian regime, right? So you have two options. You have war as a means to something, or you have war as the end in itself. Al-Farabi is saying that there is a justification for one and one is virtuous, I'll put it like that. One is virtuous in an Aristotelian sense, and one is defined by vice. For Al-Farabi, the second, right, war as means, this is virtuous, right? There is a virtue in this. There is a virtue in number two. And that is using war as a means to some end. It's not because you want to use war, and I'll get more specific in a second. It's not that you want to use war just for the warmongering sake, right? But it is a recognition that, as we said, we think about now the discourse, right? We haven't left and abandoned the previous concepts. There is a sense, as I said, with respect to what Hillary Clinton's doing. You know, you have representatives of the state traveling globally around to meet with other, heads of state. You learn a lot about their particular forms of governance to try and recognize cultural relativism, blah, 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 and adapt so that